Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our live panel discussion. Our topic today is from paralysis to preparedness, defending brands and executives in the age of disinformation. I am Michelle. I'm a senior marketing manager at Cyabra, and I'm your host for today's guided journey into the chaos, caffeine, and controlled panic in the modern crisis communication world. Now, I know that you must have been expecting our trusted CMO, Rafi Mendelson, but unfortunately, maybe conveniently, he fell a bit sick today. So I will do my best in replacing him with his signature British wit, just without the British accent.
You got
So the
this.
theme, thank you. The theme that we're unpacking today is preparedness, because the disinformation landscape is no longer something that you can monitor passively. We'll be exploring questions like, how can you protect your brand before the attack starts? And what do you do when the scenario that you plan for isn't the one that you're facing? And our goal today isn't to scare you with horror stories of reputational disasters, although we do have quite a few of those. But it's to give you something even more valuable, a sense of what actually works when you need to defend your brand and your leadership in real time. So whether you're in corporate comms, PR crisis response, or just out here from a morbid curiosity about what could possibly go wrong next, I promise that there's something in this session for all of you that you would want to write down at some point, maybe even pretend that it was your idea at your next team meeting. So feel free to do that. And just a quick note before we dive in. So this is a panel discussion and definitely not a lecture. I'm going to be shutting up very soon. And we're going to keep things conversational. I'll be throwing out some questions for our panelists, and I also encourage them to interrupt each other when needed. But definitely feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. If anything sparks a thought, and just drop it in there. We'll try to either answer it as we go or at the end of the session. And now I am thrilled to be joined by three people who've been experiencing some of the toughest moments that brands can face and survived to talk about it. So first up, we have Carreen Winters, the president of corporate reputation at MikeWorldWide. And if you read any op-ed about brand trust or a smart take on executive accountability, odds are Carreen either wrote it or inspired it. Next, we have Kathryn Metcalfe, former Chief Communication Officer at CVS Health, and currently shaping the next generation of comms leaders as a visiting professor at NYU. And Kathryn has been in the room when it matters the most, when reputations hang in the balance and statements get rewritten over and over, 15 times over again. And finally, we have Ray Cairns, the CEO of the Next Solution Group and a former comms leader at both Pfizer and Bayer. Ray combines crisis strategy with real-time intelligence, and hopefully today we'll hear about how his firm recently stopped a protest before it even began. So instead of me just reading out your bios in my best radiophonic voice, as much as I try, how about I just hand it over to you guys so you can each tell us where we're finding you today, what you do, and why people call you in panic when they have a crisis. Carreen, you want to go first?
Yikes. Why do people call me in panic? So first, thank you everyone for taking a few minutes out of your day to join us. And Michelle, thank you to you for putting this panel together. Um, as Michelle mentioned, I lead the reputation division of MikeWorldWide. And so that's all the things that you do proactively to build reputation and also reputation defense and resilience. And I think that those things go together. As for why do, people call us, I think it's a combination of experience, being very technology forward and thinking about, how can we better see around the corner, and a team that has the ability to manage through complexity. I think one of the hardest things about crisis communications is the inevitable paralysis. We almost have too much data now. And so, what's the difference between a signal and noise? What are the things that you have to tackle first? And how do you isolate the most important problem to solve rather than becoming paralyzed by all the choices? And I think that that's what great crisis communicators do, most particularly my colleagues on this on this session today, who are both really good at that. And I think that if you're interested in crisis communications, that's kind of the critical skill set.
Perfect. Kathryn, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm a 5-time chief communications officer for the leading brands, including my last post at CVS Health, where we had 300,000 employees and stores literally within 5 miles of the majority of the United States, which meant we were in constant crisis mode. And I think dealing with the issues of how do you prioritize, as Carreen said, what is noise and what are true issues that you have to manage. And I think over the last few years, the landscape has really changed. Almost anyone can spread misinformation. It is so easy to do, whether that's a disgruntled employee, a frustrated customer who didn't get what they wanted, someone who is suing you, someone who is shorting your stock. There are a lot of people out there with very easy ways now and the means to put information out that's harmful and difficult. So I'm delighted to be on the panel here with Carreen and with Ray. I know we've all been working in this important space, and I'm happy to talk trends, share tips, and advice with the group. So we welcome your questions and your thoughts. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kathryn. Right?
All right, guess I'm last here.
Best for
Thank you.
last,
Well,
Ray. Best for last.
we have a great panel. This group has had a few good conversations prior to coming to spend time with you all. Ray Cairns, CEO of Next Solutions Group. We are a reputation management firm. That's what we do in and out. That's our primary, secondary, and tertiary. It's all we do. My background is I spent last 20 years working in global roles. First, most recently at Bayer, a consumer agricultural healthcare company, where I ran communications, government relations, the foundation, patient advocacy, and a bunch of other great roles. Spent some time at Pfizer as head of global corporate communications, and before that at Merck during the days when Vioxx was being withdrawn from the market and was supposed to be a $25 billion issue. I actually joined the company to help handle that issue. Before that was a bunch of years on the agency side. The side thing I want to offer up is I do sit on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. I chair the Center for Disease Control Foundation Business Roundtable, and I also am an advisor to both the National Press Foundation and the Association of Foreign Correspondents. Now, why does any of that matter? That we give you the resumes, because what we're hoping to do here today is give you guys the insights that we've learned over many years, all the great experience you've already had here. And I'll just start real fast, if you don't mind, which is offering this incredible tip up, which is kind of really fundamental to a certain extent in what we all do. But ultimately, I think there's sort of 3 phases. There's the prior, which is all the stuff where you're supposed to start preparing yourself for. And we'll get into some of the discussions on that, which is things like understanding what your actual risks truly are, making sure you have a proper plan in place. Crisis plans are always a living, breathing document. And making sure you actually exercise on them. Do the tabletop exercises. You have the during, and we can talk a lot about that today, but you also have the post. And I can tell you some of the best organizations are the ones that actually go into the post and review what do we learn, what do we do right, what do we do wrong, and do it in a way where you're actually going to learn something. And then you make your updates back to your crisis manuals and your scenario plans and your risk plans. And unfortunately, then you start all over again the next time the next one comes about. So we'll get into a lot of these areas here. But again, it's just an honor to be here with everybody. And Michelle, thanks for putting it together.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ray. Yes, we are going to be getting into a lot of this in this discussion, so I'm very excited to get started. Let's get started by acknowledging the obvious, that the speed and absurdity of today's crisis landscape would probably give our 2015 selves an anxiety attack. There was a time where being crisis ready meant having a dusty binder on a shelf. We talked about that, but today, it means that you have to be able to uncover deep fakes, track viral falsehoods, and follow active groups coordinating across Telegram and TikTok, and just hoping that the next viral hashtag isn't your CEO at a Coldplay concert. So let me open one question for all of you. How do you think that the crisis environment changed for brands in the disinformation age? Whoever wants to go first.
This is the play portion. It's better after this. Come on, Kathryn.
Well, let me jump in and say I think the world has become much faster. So you have less time to react. I think one of the things that has challenged people is you no longer own control of your story and your information. In the past, if we were upset or unhappy about information that we didn't think was correct, it was easy enough to, put information up on your website, correct the narrative, share it with some key stakeholders and move on. And I think you realize now that you can't control the story in those classic ways, that there are more channels and more opportunities for misinformation to be spread, and it's moving faster than ever before. So, I remember when we had, crisis playbooks and scenarios where we said you had to be reachable within 60 minutes. And if you weren't reachable within 60 minutes, here's your number two, here's your number three, and here's kind of the chain to go down. You don't even have the 60 minutes any longer. In fact, with all of the news aggregators, we were having employees send information in, or family and friends of employees telling us that there was a problem before the company even knew there was a problem. And that is a really tough place to be, because you don't even have the 6 minutes, much less 60 minutes, to start acting and responding. But Ray and Carreen, would love your thoughts on this as well.
Hey, why don't you go, since you went last, the first
Well,
battle.
again, this is the polite section. Wait to the back end of this thing. We're jumping a little bit. So look, the environment from which we're talking about, I agree 100%. The old school is what we've had, and now the new day and new age. However, at the same time, one of the roles that we all play is bring calm. That's part of our job, is to understand the environment around us, make sure we are truly navigating it, but in a way where we're able to help the client understand that this might be the biggest thing you're facing as an institution, as an executive, as an organization. But the reality is, in my former roles, I had one CEO who could get 1,000 letters on a particular topic, and I would never hear about it. I had another one to get one, and I would hear about it, and I'm supposed to respond with it. That's a cultural difference for the organizations and how we operate. And so not every company is the same. And to understand that, and whether you're in-house or as a supporting role as an advisor, is to truly understand how your clients operate in the environment. So when it's misinformation, or it's misunderstanding, or it's frankly just true flat out lies, understanding that environment is also one of those important pieces, because there are some organizations that just look and go, you know what, I'm not going to worry about that. It's not my issue. Now, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. And our job is to help them understand through data, through the insights, and through our collective experience, how to make sure you look at each one of these situations and really make a judgment call to say, actually, I pay attention to this one. It may look little to you, but it actually has a chance of being a complete inferno if not managed properly. And I'd love to get into more details on that, throughout the session too, because there's a lot in that arena of really using that experience to make sure you don't break into jail, as folks like to call it, where you don't do too much, where all of a sudden now you create a bigger issue than you had previously.
Yeah. So picking up a couple of things that both Kathryn and Ray have put out there. So a crisis can start anywhere. And so the idea that crisis communications is something that you prepare and then wait in case something happens is definitely a thing of the past. It is a question of when and not if. And I think the smartest brands are pivoting from a framework of crisis communications to always on issues management. And so that addresses, what Kathryn said about the first hour. 60 seconds is the new first hour. And the first thing you have to do is you have to verify whether this thing that's being reported to you from the internet or from an employee or from someone's mother, people's moms are great sources of what they've heard or seen in the news. All of those things come into play. And then I want to pick up also on what Ray said about breaking into jail. I think more than ever, the option to say nothing is an option. There was a time where if there were an issue related to your brand, you were required to respond. But one of the speed of the ecosystem is both a blessing and a curse. It makes it harder, but it also means that the subject changes more quickly. So the critical question that you need to kind of dig into is this a systemic ongoing issue that is going to continue to grow and continue to come up? And so we want to, as Ray said, tamp it down early, even though it feels small right now. Or is this something that will pass? And there is a lot of use of data to help you make that decision, but it is still a judgment call that needs to be made. And so before anyone starts to talk about what should we say, the first question should be what do we believe? And then what, if anything, should we do? And we've spent a lot of time setting up this panel to talk about misinformation and disinformation, and Ray brought up the question of misunderstandings. There are also situations where you're dealing with a factual problem, like you have a bad policy, you made a bad decision, something went wrong operationally, an employee went rogue. And so the impulse to brush those things aside in the era of misinformation, I think, is a risk in and of itself. To think that we can just ignore something that we're actually responsible for because of the volume. So I think defining what you're dealing with in the quick first moments, that's the most important thing.
So I had a little example I'll share with the team. When my former employer, I won't name which one it was, this was unfortunately the New York Times. It wasn't social. Obviously, a lot of the issues management now comes out of social first, but this was the New York Times, a little more old school. And the reporter called and said, we're writing a story about a former employee. This was a few years back. It wasn't that long ago. A former employee who their partner passed away and they're being denied their benefits, their retirement benefits, which, okay. I said, well, thanks for calling my attention to it. Can you give me more details? The person gave it to me. I hung the phone up. I walked over to my HR director, sat with him for 2 seconds, and we got to change this policy. Back to your point, Carreen. We got to change the policy. This is a bad policy because we already, as an organization, we already made some changes in our organization to recognize same-sex marriages. And again, in fact, we've been talking about still is crazy. Anyway, we then took it to the CEO and said, look, we're going to make this change. Within 32 minutes, I called the New York Times back and said, listen, thanks for bringing our attention. Policy's been changed. We've actually spoken with the employee or the employee's partner. They're going to get their benefits starting next week. The Times reporter goes, wait, what? I said, look, thank you for bringing it to our attention. We were unaware that we've made the change and fixed. What do you need from us as far as the statement goes? He goes, well, I can't write the story now. I'm like, well, sure you can. You can write the story about how we made the change so quickly and how you brought to our attention we did the right move. Of course, they didn't do that. I didn't expect the New York Times would do that for a large, health, agricultural, pharmaceutical company. But being open to the environment that you're not always right is also a piece that, the way we've always looked at in my world, you got problems, you got issues, and you got crises. Those are my 3 rankings. This one fell in the problem arena. It could have been a very big issue very quickly. Lord only knows what could have happened online if folks found out that the company was denying benefits to a partner in a state that's recognized same-sex marriage and the companies. So anyway, I don't get too deep into the piece of it, but I'll throw out again, recognize that sometimes people are calling you out for stuff where you do have a policy issue. That's Carreen's point. And you got to be open to making a quick change to that kind of policy issue before it becomes a bigger problem.
Before you can say something, you have to do something. Right. And so what Ray has just outlined here is, I think Kathryn probably has a million examples of when someone came to her, hands wringing and pearls clutching, and said, we have a communications problem. And what you actually have to say to that executive is, we have a policy problem. We have an operations problem. We have a business problem. And until you tell me what we're going to do about that, there's nothing to discuss about what we're going to say about it.
Well said.
Agreed.
Wonderful. Really great stuff. I think it's very thought-provoking. I want to move on to another topic, actually, but obviously very related. Actually, something that sounds a bit made up, but it's absolutely true. Prebunking. So prebunking means debunking misinformation before it takes hold. I've seen arguments for and against this as an effective tool in the crisis comms armory. Carreen, I would love for you to explain what exactly prebunking is and maybe tell us a bit more about prebunk, something that you've been working on to defend brands from misinformation.
Yeah. So the concept of prebunking begins with an recognition that most of us know where our problem areas are. You know, pick a business, any business. There are issues related to that business. So if I am a producer of animal protein, I know I have environmentalists and I know I have animal well-being. If I am a big pharmaceutical company, which Kathryn and Ray can speak to far better than me, I know how I have issues about access and drug costs and bad outcomes. And so you know what those things are. And I think the mind shift that people need to make is there's so much discussion about AI as a tool. AI is a stakeholder. And if you think about the fact that the first place that people get information within nanoseconds, and the example I'll use is Delta Airlines had a problem up in Canada where they cartwheeled an aircraft on the runway. And within minutes, there was all kinds of online conversation about Delta's great safety record.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, my Apple Watch is talking to me. And where that came from was the LLMs and what they were feeding into the market because people are using LLMs as a replacement for search. So GEO is the new SEO. And what's interesting about LLMs is that they work really hard to filter information and decide what's relevant and decide what's true. And if you want to pre-bunk and inform audiences with factual informations in real time, you need to do the work with the LLMs in advance. And so if you take a step back and think about what does an LLM care about? What do they trust? They trust some sources that we as PR people sometimes hear are not important, right? So when your CEO says to you, we don't need to bother with that trade rag, nobody reads it anyway. Well, ChatGPT reads it and relies on it. And when you haven't thought about whether you've been public and forthcoming about policies on various issues related to the core of your business, if that content is not readily available in the public domain, whether it's on your website or a trade association's website or a competitor's website, the LLMs don't know it. And so with technology now, you can scrape the LLMs. And here's the tricky part. What they believe changes all the time. So you can't set it and forget it. But you can scrape the LLMs. If you ask the right questions, they will tell you what their primary sources of information are. And you can proactively pre-bunk your areas of vulnerability with the information you put into the marketplace. For someone who's been in this business for 3 decades, this was mind-blowing for me to think like, wait a minute, I can preempt the feedback, the criticism, the misinformation, the disinformation. And it's pretty straightforward. It's time consuming and it requires very matrix thinking about where a story might go and what people need to know. But it's a discipline that I think is almost more important than scenario planning. Because a scenario plan, who has ever deployed a pre-prepared scenario response as is? Nobody. So what that does is it gives you a running head start on your response, but you have an even better running head start if you do the pre-bunking work. So I know that was a lot. Did that make sense? Am I hallucinating on my cold medicine?
Yeah. Carreen, I think you're spot on. You really have to go a lot further to get verified information about your company, your position, your products out in reputable channels. I wanted to build on that because I think one of the things that we as communicators and advisors have to really push is helping our companies understand that it's not just the Wall Street Journal that you have to go to anymore. And sometimes it's not even just the trade publications. Carreen's given you a really good example of why those matter for LLMs. The other piece is there are a lot of influencers and people who your stakeholders trust. So in addition to you doing everything that you can as a company and as an entity, I would also say you have to go to the step beyond that and look at advocacy and what are the most influential people in your industry, in your sphere, saying about you? Do they have the right information? And it's not just about, your customers or your um, uh, uh, internal clients being able to recognize mis and disinformation, the general public. It's about those who are really important to you, all of the people who make decisions about whether your business is going to grow and deliver on its goals. So I think you have to be a lot more deliberate, a lot more creative, and use more outlets, more channels, and more voices than you ever have in the past.
Those third parties, they're so much more credible than any company, right? This is who we trust people, we don't trust companies. And so I think, Kathryn, you've raised a really important point that the education and engagement work with those folks early on is also really important.
Let me add one
So
more thought to that,
yeah,
which is
go for
I
it.
want to come back to employees and
Mm,
make a point that you can't assume that you're going to win employees over if the volume of noise is loud and you're not preparing or responding with appropriate facts and information. And not just that, but facts and information that your employees can be using with friends, family, and influencers. So I would add, in the crush of a crisis, don't really forget one of your key audiences is in your backyard, and they may need more information, more time, and more TLC than you've given them in the past. We had a number of examples at my former employers where, again, employees would come in with that news first and be a little bit skeptical if you didn't share or have the right information that they felt they needed to combat what was happening in the marketplace.
Kathryn and I worked at Pfizer together, and our old colleague and boss used to say, you can have employees, you can have 10,000 ambassadors or 10,000 terrorists. Which one do you prefer, right? Empower your employees with the right information, and actually try and speak to them as opposed to having them read it in the press. That's or on social media for if I can throw back to the point we're being made here, which is again being flexible and being open to the change around you and not being so stellar. Yeah, look, crisis manuals are important to write. They're important to keep. I back to the idea of putting in a binder. Post 9/11, I was down at the World Trade Center. We were working with the mayor's office. Some guy walked into a meeting with the mayor's office and a whole bunch of federal trades, and he drops this huge book on the desk, and it covered with dust. It turned out to be asbestos, of course. And they said, "What the hell is that?" He goes, "Oh, that's the crisis manual for the World Trade Center." It was at the bottom of the desk. Again, it was useful. Now,
mm,
I use that only as an example of what my colleagues here were just talking through, which is you've got to be flexible. All my crisis manuals for all my clients are on my phone. I have direct access to them. They're not even printed anymore, and they're password protected, and they're in places they should belong. But I remember 20 years ago when the world changed, the last time it changed, which was when the journals that were important to us, all of a sudden, we were at least the rank of the significant importance, we were at Pfizer. And all of a sudden, this first list pops up where it's like WSJ.com. Well, wait a second. What do you mean? No, the Wall Street Journal is important. No, all of a sudden now WSJ.com is important. It's a whole new group of people, and they're doing it a different way. Within a year of that moment, the top 10, 5 of them were .com based publications with different groups, and it was a moment of reflection. We kind of went, well, that's kind of weird. Think about how weird it is now when we're talking about influencers and the fact that they're not even journalists anymore. Some are citizen journalists, but there's no editors now involved. The editors ultimately become humanity and community who make the decision whether or not this is important or not. Well, if the information is wrong or
mhm.
false or misleading, well, it's no longer, you can't go to the editor of the Wall Street Journal and be like, hey, can you guys make a correction over here because what you wrote there was incorrect? It's a whole different world there. So
Yeah.
whether it's the .com entry or the influencers or whatever's coming next, we have to be open to the aspect that whatever you did yesterday may not work anymore, and you
Yeah.
have to be able to adapt yourself accordingly on behalf of your companies.
Can I build on something you've said, Ray, about journalists? The other thing I think we've seen is the incredible shrinking newsroom. And so you used to have beat reporters who were very knowledgeable about industries and companies. And so they could sniff out misinformation more easily. They had a relationship with the company where they would say, well, that doesn't jive with what I know about this company. But someone who's writing about an issue related to Pfizer today might have been writing about airlines the day before and supermarkets the day before that. And so, and at the same time, we've seen this rise in opinion-based journalism. So the whole ecosystem for fact-based reporting is different. And the reporters are more susceptible to misinformation because they don't have the luxury of being on a beat and becoming an expert in that industry or on a topic in the way that they used to. And that makes our job trickier.
Agreed.
You guys are great. You're actually answering so many of the questions I already had in plan. So this is wonderful stuff. Very excited that we're covering. So Ray, you mentioned that big binder and how detailed crisis plans used to be with color-coded tabs and flow charts. But we already know that crises never actually look like page 14 in the manual. So what happens when your plan doesn't match the reality? And why is scenario planning no longer sufficient? Kathryn, maybe you can tell us, what does an agile crisis response framework look like today?
Sure. There were too many crises for us at CVS to ever do scenario planning for all of them. Certainly, we worked very closely within our organization to identify the biggest risks and the biggest areas. Picking up on something that Ray talked about at the start of our panel, that was always really critical. But we decided that our communications team did not have the time and the ability to do the work that you'd want to do for all of these areas. So instead, we focused on systems, processes, and governance to help us through. So we did a lot of pre-work and analyzed what are all of the types of issues that might come our way. We knew the things, to Carreen's point, that were our vulnerabilities, but we took it a few steps further. And I'll break down one example: societal issues, right? What would you be willing to comment on? What would we know for sure we'll never comment on? And what do we need to call an audible on based on the nuances of the issue? So we spent a lot of time really looking at what does that large kind of decision tree look like? Who in our company would need to be consulted before taking a stand? And what is the process? And how could we get it down to mere minutes to make a call and decision on these things? We also set up teams that met on a regular basis. So instead of a book on a shelf somewhere, a binder on a shelf, we had live interactive meetings. We would talk about the greatest opportunities to build our reputation, but also the greatest, possible threats, and how are we handling them, and what were we prepared to do. So we really spent a lot of time trying to think in advance and put out there, systems, processes, and governance that we could use to help us be effective and efficient when the crisis hit. But I have to say this, the job of a communicator is not easy these days. You have more coming at you, and in most companies, fewer resources, right? Many companies are scaling back and looking at, how do you do things better and do more with less? So a communicator's, time to be able to dig in and do this work is precious and really at a premium. So I think one of the things that I'm hearing from all of us on the panel is, don't try to work harder, work smarter when it comes to issues and to crises, and set yourself up for success, rather than having to chase technology, people, channels, and systems when the bullet comes your way. You can only dodge so many of them. I really believe the bullet's going to hit everybody at some point in time.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So if we want to move from reacting to predicting, um, can we catch crises before they erupt? Ray's company, for example, emphasizes business intelligence and advanced data analysis to spot early warning signs of activist plans or misinformation brewing. Ray, can you tell us a bit more about how you do this? I'd love the audience to hear about how you prevented a protest using early intelligence and what that process looked like.
All right, I'll keep it tight. I'm watching our time. So when I left the corporate life, I decided I wanted to build a firm that I would have hired myself, that Pfizer would have hired, Bayer, whoever they could. And so in doing so, I created sort of 3 units. Business intelligence, which is run by a former military intelligence officer and a cyber operative from the NSA. There's a nice team over there. And then we've got our communications team, and then we have the crisis team. Now, both those groups are run by former very senior journalists, senior editor at Bloomberg, senior producer at ABC. And the goal, again, is these are the folks that I would have hired myself. The concept is quite easy, which is back to everything we've talked about here. It's no longer the Wall Street Journal is calling you and telling you got a problem. Now it's showing up other places. Oftentimes I'll see on Instagram a major news issue way before the news even has it, right? Some explosion happens, something terrible happens. It's on TikTok. Anyway, so our ability to track is fine. That's still not enough. The idea of how do you utilize open source intelligence? How do you utilize not just the clear, deep, but actually the dark web to really figure out what's actually going on behind the scenes that you can't see? That it hasn't even become a problem yet, but it's brewing someplace else. Look, Reddit is a great place to go and find out what people are talking about, but sometimes it starts even deeper than that. And so the Intel team, that's their sole purpose, and that's why we put the group together. You can't boil the ocean, guys, right? Because there's a lot of sources out there, and that's why you need people who are really smart, who actually know this world. I mean, way smarter than I am on the Intel side. But what happens is that intel and that data and all the insights, and your organization is one that does an incredible job at bringing insights forward. That then allows us to turn with the cyber and issues management team, and then figure out what actually are they coming towards us. So back to your story. So there was a UK based client doing a deal with an India based business, and the project was happening in Australia. Major protesters were going after all 3 of these groups, all 3 of the areas, to try and figure out how to disrupt their business and disrupt their way of life. The intelligence unit doing their job actually wound up finding the playbook, their own crisis playbook for the organization, and it included information about when they were going to do the next protest. Okay, well, you don't make a big deal out of this thing, but ultimately went back to the client and said, they were mostly virtual. This was pretty recently, it was post-COVID. So we recommended them, have your folks work from home on this particular day, because these folks are going to protest you all. We had people on the ground in London and other parts of the world, alerted everybody who's aware of it. Security is aware, law enforcement aware. The people showed up, did their protest. There was no response, and guess what? They left within 30 minutes because they realized nobody was home. Now, that's an easier win to show the value of how do you preempt these things from taking place. It's not always that simple. Okay, I don't want to sit here and claim we have all the answers to all this stuff. That's impossible. The team did a really good job of figuring out this particular organization, how they operate, what's their method of approach, how do they do what they do. And so those details are now much deeper than the day that when Kathryn and I were at Pfizer and Occupy Wall Street showed up to our front door with 1,000 people. Security calls and says, what should we do? And I said, I'll be down in a minute. Show up in my suit. I said, who's in charge? And the guy said, well, I am. I said, okay, here's my card. Call me if you need anything. I went upstairs to the cafeteria, got hundreds of bottles of water, lemonade, and cookies, had them bring them down to these folks. Guys, look like it's hot out here. I hope you guys are going to be okay. Again, call me if you need anything. Went back inside. They were gone in 20 minutes. There's always a different way of handling these situations. And again, we should just be open to them. I took way more than time. I'm going to yield my time back to my colleagues.
Actually, can I jump? I see there's a question that came in, and it's a really good one, maybe for us to close our call on. And that is, if you're on today's call and you get it, right, and you want to make this shift toward a more strategic response, how do you go about doing that? What is the right way to move your organization from being very reactive to a more proactive one? And I want to build on, I think, what you've been hearing from all of us today, which is, one, really understand what's happening, use good monitoring and information, really analyze what the insights are that you're getting out of that, what trends you're seeing. And I would suggest that you take some time and really begin a very simple kind of strategic plan and issues heat map so that you can continually bring people back to the big picture. Do what Ray has suggested at the top of this panel. Do your after action reviews or whatever your organization calls them, and start learning and challenging yourself to learn from all of these one-offs and tie them back to the strategy each time. Have you created the right proactive approach? And one of the best things that I like to do is look at what's happening in your industry and be prepared for those, not just the things that are happening in your company. So if you are in a space where there is a lot of scrutiny, a lot of interest from, government, from regulators, from key stakeholders, take the time. If you can get a few members of your team together, trusted advisors, your agencies, it's time well spent if you can really step back from the urgent and focus on what is truly important. That hour or two there will help you work smarter and not continually work harder and harder and harder. But would love, Carreen and Ray, for you to weigh in on that question that came in as well.
I think you've given our audience great advice, Kathryn. What I would add is that the ecosystem has changed dramatically, but so have the tools. And data is your friend. So for a long time, people like us were using experience-based insight to advise senior leaders of companies about this is likely to become an issue, or we need to be more prepared for this. But between better upstream monitoring and being able to identify nodes of conversation while they're still small, the use of predictive analytics to help us understand what the trajectory of a conversation or a story might be, the evaluation of the LLMs, and if this were to become a story, what would people learn about us along the way? Anytime you can go to senior leaders and show them data that tells them something that they either didn't know before or they've been secretly afraid of, that is the opening to make change. And so I would really encourage people to, where your vulnerabilities are, go find the data to support the recommendations you're making for change, whether that's a change in policy or a change in process and governance. It is very powerful.
I'll keep mine tight because my last answer was a lot longer than I wanted to be. Ultimately, well, the conference board put out a survey about a year or two ago talking about global CEOs and their knowledge and understanding of their crisis plan. Do they even have a crisis plan? The numbers are staggering. Half didn't even know if they even had one. A third thought they actually did have one. Only 25 to 30% confirmed they actually certainly did. That's important to keep in mind, no matter what place you're serving. Having some level of plan, whatever it looks like for your organization, is key. Being able to train upon it is key. Most companies don't train on it. And I'm not talking you have to do a full day on site, everyone's there. That's not how crisis works. It's typically on a weekend, or it happens, when you're trying to leave on a Friday night, something blows up.
Friday before a holiday.
100%, right? So the point is, understand, back to the comments, understand your organization and train around your organization. Even if you just once a month did a 30-minute with your own team and did some sort of sit in a room and go, okay, this happens, what do we do? All right, who do we call? What's the plan to go? These are done not because you're trying to waste people's time. Nobody runs a marathon without training. And so these are the things that I guarantee you ask anyone who's actually been through it, and they wish they had done more training in advance. You go through a major crisis, you wish you were better prepared. And in this day and age of cyber, I can tell you right now, this is 100%, and Carreen, you back me up on this. Insurance companies require you to do these trainings. You are required to have a plan. You are required to have a tabletop, make sure you're actually doing what you're doing. That is required. So at the end of the day, guys, the opportunity is yours. People always talk about, well, if I could have done something differently, well, do it now. What's stopping you? Our business is not a 9-to-5 job anyway. So add a little bit of extra hour once or twice a month and kind of get your plan in place and, start training on it and show the people the value. People wish they would have done more before the crisis. And so learn from the experiences of others.
Wow, team, you've really raised some excellent and very important points. This has been an incredibly insightful session. I think we can easily go for another hour, but we are just about out of time. So I really want to thank everybody in the audience that joined us today. And of course, I want to thank the incredible panel of experts that joined us. Truly remarkable and exciting session. I'm very excited to share the recording with everybody after this. If you have more questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, feel free to respond to our email, connect with us on social media. If you want to connect with our panelists, do the same, please. And of course, keep an eye out for our next session coming up. So thank you again, everybody. This really was an amazing session. Thank you all and have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.